You guys may have seen our video about the KEF 104 Series 2 restoration, and I've had people ask me, well, why didn't you show the replacement of the Ferrofluid in the tweeters? So I had a pair brought to me the other day, so we're going to look into this. In the first place, the owner here, he cut these leads, so do this any way you see fit. But I've marked here brown, and you'll see here in a minute I'm going to show you something else. But first of all, we're going to talk about taking these leads off. So we've got it cut here. What you've got to understand is you can't lay a lot of heat onto this. You will melt this onto the flange here, and you'll ruin the tweeter. You have to use a moderate amount of heat, and you have to be quick. As soon as this starts to break loose, so we're going to lay our iron on here. Just as soon as that breaks loose, we're going to take it off and get the heat off of it. We don't want to destroy this tweeter diaphragm. Same thing when we go to desolder this. We're going to lay this on here for the shortest amount of time possible. There you go. Alright, now let me show you something else here right quick before we go any further with this, what we're going to do. Now, I've already marked this brown. That's where our brown wire was. Now, here's one we've already opened up. We have two alignment pins, and the alignment pins correspond with the, obviously, with the holes on the flange here. But even though we have alignment pins, we've marked the brown wire here. Now, we're going to put a couple of marks right here along the terminal with the blue wire, so we know that that's going to go right there when we go back. We're also going to put a dashed line around here. Even though we have alignment pins, when it goes to putting this thing back together and getting it right, since we don't have a flange we can mount on here, so they don't use a flange because it mounts right into the cabinet baffle. So we want to make sure when we get this back on here, after we replace the Ferrofluid, that we get it right back on where it was to begin with. Like I say, here's one that's opened up, and we're in the process right now of using blotting paper to remove the original fluid. Now, I've already got most of it out, and you'll see when you can quit working this, because you're always going to see it down there. You're never going to get it completely clean, and it's always, since it's magnetic fluid, it's always going to ride up into the gap. So when you know you've run enough blotter paper is when it starts coming out like that, and you can't get it completely brown. You see the white there? See, there's not much Ferrofluid left in there. I've done this I've used about 8 pieces of blotter paper so far. So now I'm getting where after I run a piece around, when I pull it out, it's not just soaked in brown fluid, but as I pull it around, when I remove it, you see there's a lot of white showing. See, on the other side it's all white. So we're just about done pulling the old fluid out. A couple more runs with the blotter paper, and we'll have the old fluid out. We'll go ahead and finish with this one, and there's a couple of things I want to show you about removing this diaphragm. We'll do that in just a second. Alright, a couple of things about removing this diaphragm. It's glued down. It's a little bit of the adhesive pad stuck to the frame there. The rest of it you see is on the bottom of the flange. Those are the cutouts, the indents for the alignment pins. And you can see where, like I talked about, when you desolder these wires, that's, you know, that solder connection there can easily melt. So you don't want to put a lot of heat to it. We're going to have to clean this fluid off. We'll show you that in a minute. We're cleaning out the fluid out of the gap, but we've also got to clean the voice coil assembly, and we're going to use isopropyl alcohol to do that. Now let me show you, when you're removing this, a couple of things I want to make note of here. Well, anytime you're using a sharp knife and you have to apply pressure, and when you're in a situation, if you, while applying pressure, you slip, you could run the knife across your finger and stab yourself in the hand. You could severely damage this voice coil assembly, cut a lead in half. So you don't want that knife to go out of control. Therefore, when I work this knife under the edge of the flange, and notice I'm not going between the black plastic and the phenolic material. I'm not going between. I'm going between the phenolic material and the top plate. So I'm taking the whole thing. Both layers are coming off. Alright. Now, what I want to say about if you have to use a lot of pressure. See, I've already lifted this one, so I'm not going to have a lot of pressure here on camera. But what I'm going to do, if I have to come along here to cut this loose, and I'm applying pressure, I'm going to hold my fingers in such a way that if the knife slips on me, it can't go very far. In this case, it will hit my fingers, and my fingers will stop it from going any farther. In other words, if I'm making pressure right here and I got a really tough spot in the glue, and then that spot breaks through, then I could go all the way through to the voice coil and cut the coil and ruin it. So I'm going to put my fingers up here in such a way that if I do slip while I'm applying pressure, it won't be able to go very far because my fingers will stop it. So I'm going to do that all the way around. I'm going to use my fingers to guard in case I get to a tough spot and I'm pushing really hard and the knife slips. I don't want it to go flying down in here and do some damage. So watch how you hold your tool. Watch how you hold your hand. Watch where your other fingers are, and be careful you don't damage yourself or the assembly. And guard against, when you're applying a lot of pressure, that you're going to have some kind of slippage and you're going to do some damage. So always be aware of that. So we're going to work this knife in all the way around, and once again we have 2 alignment pins, and they set almost 90 degrees off to where the terminals are. So as we're coming around here to cut this glue loose, we're going to hit the pin right there. Now realizing that's a pin, so pull your knife back, get around the pin, and then continue on. Now once you've worked this all the way around and you've got that glue cut, then you can start to lift. You don't want to pry one side while the other side's stuck and bend this flange or damage the voice coil because it's caught in a bind in the gap. So keep working and slowly lift and work all the way around and feel as you go. Okay, so now it's loose all the way around. Alright, now we're going to carefully, because we don't want to pry one side, or we want it to come out and stay level with the top plate. So we're going to easily work it out, pull it straight out. Don't let any of the remaining glue grab it and turn it sideways on you. And you see how delicate the voice coil on that aluminum form is. It's very easily damaged, very easily knocked out around. So we're going to clean this ferrofluid out of the gap and the ferrofluid off the coil, and then we're going to reassemble. So we can't damage this in this process because we're not replacing it. We're replacing the fluid, and we will reuse this voice coil. Alright. We've cut our blotter paper down into small pieces that, in this case, about a ½ inch by an inch, because we want it to be able to fit in the gap, and you know, each piece of paper is only going to take up so much fluid, so we're cutting them down to size where there's just enough left where we can hold it, and we're going to run it around the gap. At first, you don't really have to run around the gap because it's going to, even if you just put it in one place and pull it back out, it's done its job. See how it looks really wet and really dark? That's what it's going to look like at first. And then, like I say, after you do this with about 8, 10, 12 pieces, you get down to where it's less wet and less dark. And then as you keep going, you finally get to where you're not completely dark at all, and it's not wet looking at all. And when you get down to where you do it and you're mainly pulling the paper up white, then, and you look down in here, you see you've just about cleared out all the old ferrofluid. So, you know, little pieces like this, and like I say, probably 8 to 12 pieces of that size to get all that fluid out. Okay. Alright, good old-fashioned isopropyl alcohol, 50%. This one, it comes up to 90%, whichever you want to use. Cotton swab. Alright, apply some alcohol to the swab. Anytime you're dealing with a replacement diaphragm, a diaphragm assembly, a voice coil, you always have to be really careful how you handle it. You certainly don't want to drop it. And you don't want to put any pressure on it. Now that the ferrofluid is there and you can see it, and so we're going to come around with our swab with the alcohol and applying really no pressure at all. This is just too delicate, so you have to be very, very careful and very patient and work your way around with the swab with the alcohol. And you're going to have to do this, 4, 5, 6, 8 times and use several swabs to remove all that ferrofluid and also the inside of the form. See right around the lip, see that fluid in there? See that? Lift that fluid out of there. See how I'm doing that? Now when you're doing this, be very careful you don't deform the shape of this voice coil former. Don't knock it out around. Don't hang up on that expansion gap and bend that form. It's very delicate. Keep working, keep working. If it starts getting sticky there, more alcohol. Liberally apply the alcohol. Don't be afraid of it. The alcohol's not going to hurt anything. You don't want to be excessive with it. You don't want alcohol running all over the place, but you want enough alcohol, and then you want to be able to soak that alcohol up with your swab and take that old fluid out of there. It's dry, it's gummy, and it's not doing its job any longer, so we need to get that old fluid out so we can replace it with some new ferrofluid. Okay? We'll show you that when we get around to that. Alright, so we used alcohol and a swab, and we've cleaned out the voice coil form on the inside and the voice coil on the outside and got rid of all the old nasty fluid. We showed you how we cleaned out the gap. So we've got the gaps clean and we've got the voice coil assemblies clean. We got our ferrofluid, little applicator tube. There's a neat trick about ferrofluid, magnetic oil, magnetic gap, flux in the gap. So look, we don't have to spin this around or spread it around. Watch what it does. I don't know if you can see that detail, but I'm not squeezing it. Look at that. The magnetic field is pulling the fluid right down into the gap. And it will equally distribute it all the way around the gap. This fluid will flow all the way around the gap. I don't know if you can catch that detail, but you'll see as you use this fluid and you put it in the gap, it will self-distribute. Alright, so when you get that done, what we're going to do is put a very, very light adhesive on here. We don't want to permanently attach this, but we want to put just the lightest, and I'm going to use a very, very thin layer of contact cement just right here where the alignment pins are, and a little spot here and there, and then we're going to put it right back together. And like I said, I've marked this so that I get the polarity the same way it was. I get the brown wire on the original contact, and then since there's no flange on these, it will be complete when it's actually mounted into the baffle of the KEF 104.